episode 327, Change in the Air. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. A big shout out and an even bigger thank you to Jay Love for the coffee you sent me through the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website and in the show notes. The notification came through as I was queuing to purchase one such beverage, so the timing was perfect. Thanks again. It's late mid-February and there's a tinge on the paddocks around these parts that hints at an early autumn. It could be the week or so of southwest to southerly winds blowing over this part of the Apple Isle, but it really does feel like an early autumn. And for us, that's probably a good thing. I've come to terms with the Mediterranean climate we have here. Hot, dry summer, relatively speaking, and cool, damp, mild winters. So I'm not growing anything other than perennials at the moment, pears, apples, raspberries and some persistent blackberries, which are on the way out. The raspberries came in early this summer. For the first time in the last 4 years, we were picking them before Christmas. And as the raspberries come to an end, the blackberries are ready or thereabouts. And this very day I picked the first hatful of the year. The apples will be another month away, and the pears have always been a bit problematic for me. I can never be sure when they're ready. But this year, instead of receiving 4 to 6 fruits from each of our 3 trees, we'll be picking in the hundreds, so I can afford to test some, even if I'm early. Working on the idea of an early start to autumn, the clover seed, buckwheat and winter wheat will all go in together in the next fortnight or so. The clover, the aim is to have that as a living mulch. The buckwheat is a cover crop to scavenge as much phosphorus as they can, and then seed off and die off when the first frosts arrive. The wheat will be the main crop for our bread needs and maybe some chook food, maybe all the chook feed if things go well. The main aim though is for the bread flour needs, which should be covered by about 50 kilos of grain. 2 half-kilo loaves a week is sufficient. And I've been experimenting with no-knead, slow ferment and even some sourdough versions. And the bread is really good, even with commercial flours. I can't wait to try flour I've milled 10 minutes before I start the baking process. Once the clover, buckwheat and wheat are all in, I'll have time to expand the raspberries, and there's plenty of shoots coming up around the periphery of the patch. These will do nicely to expand the production. I am really enjoying the raspberries this year. Last winter we had a windstorm roll through here one night that put us in a brownout for a week while the crews worked on more urgent cases where trees took down power lines, roofs, cut roadways and generally made life less than ideal. While we were waiting, everything with a motor in it had to be turned off on the advice of Tas Networks, our local electricity supplier. We still had some light, full interwebs and telly and recharged phones and laptops. Though no running water, but we do have bathing facilities at work, so it wasn't so bad. But the freezer was turned off, and eventually 75% of last summer's raspberries were lost. The pigs didn't seem to mind, they were quite happy with them. But shop-brought raspberries are a tasteless disappointment to me. Everything in season, I guess, but I've still filled the freezer with about 9 kilos worth after all the ones we'd eaten while picking. The great advantage of not trying to grow annuals over summer, and I am grieving the corn crop, maybe a small irrigated patch next year, maybe. The advantage is the savings in water use, the resting of soil in the oversized gardens, undersized field, let's call them sowing areas, ready for a minimum till and sowing of the trio of seeds mentioned above. The decision has also freed up thinking time, bandwidth, if you like, creative space. I think you see what I mean. And this has been handy as I've been professionally employed to produce a podcast season as well as my day job in disabilities. And as you know from, if you've subscribed to this feed, the trailer was sent out a couple of weeks back. Now, if you missed the trailer or you're still just interested, I've included a link in the show notes. It's under my current project. Any feedback would be gratefully received. And while I've been leaving it alone, the soil has been doing its thing. I have grassed walkways between the sowing areas that's never minimum tilled as a safety buffer against unexpected heavy rain between the min-till and the germination of seeds. to catch any soil that might wash away. Now, they haven't been needed for this, but I keep them anyway. The point is these strips have dried out, becoming rather hard underfoot, while the sowing areas, where I've allowed them to regrow in their own ways, are soft and yielding underfoot. I try not to walk on them, but I did the other day out of interest. It's very pleasing to see the positive effects of growing a variety of things on an area and observing how different it is along the straight edge between the sowing areas and the pathways. Not that I use the pathways often, maybe once a week, to have a sit and observe what's going on. The major differences between the paths and the sowing areas is that the sowing areas have been, sown. The chooks have scratched around the fallen grains and generally had a ball in the oats I left to reseed into their patch. If the chooks have left any of the seed, that is. Either way, it's going to get the other 3 seeds, so we might have some oats in with the wheat. And the pathways have just been mown. The chooks spent some time on these, but seemed to prefer the sowing areas where the food was, so it makes sense, I guess. An early autumn here might need an early spring on the other side of the equator. I'm not sure it works that way, but who's to know? When we were being hammered with 45 plus degree days up west of Sydney, these were coming at a week at a time in early 2018, I believe Ireland was copping a snowstorm, leaving 5 or 6 foot snowdrifts on the southern margin of the Republic. I know that's not much snow to the Canadians out there, but it was out of character for Ireland. Then again, I am constantly reminded that the plural of anecdote is not data, but indeed anecdotes, so maybe things will progress as per the manual this year where you are. I hope the coming seasons are filled with wonder and joy and food and laughter no matter which side of the equator you live on, or even if you live astride the equator. The Change Underground Academy No Dig Gardening course is still available. Link in the show notes. Please tell your friends. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.